All right. Hey, Chris Gates here, and I'm going to give my talk I gave at BlackHat at the CISO Summit, which was not recorded. This is on building offensive security teams. All right. So here's me, Chris Gates. So I'm currently the senior offensive security manager at Robinhood, which means that I take care of what was previously bug bounty, but pen testing, red teaming, and attack surface management here. I've been doing IT for 20 years. I'm recording this in August of 2023. So I've been doing this for 20 years. 15 of that has been red team work and OffSec work. So I've worked in a variety of verticals, U.S. Army red team, ton of consulting jobs as I found my place, gov and mil consulting. I worked at Laura's for 3 years and some change, one of the premier red teaming consultancies. Social media, Facebook, I was their first offensive security engineer. Uber, I actually did blue team, purple team work there. Cruise, so self-driving cars. BitMEX, cryptocurrency, and then, like I said, I'm at Robinhood working on all the things that Robinhood is involved in. Quick agenda. Why this talk? When to have an OffSec team? Common question that I get. Team structure, responsibilities, things you should expect from your OffSec lead. So I'm kind of giving you the answers to the test of all the things I would love my bosses to be asking of me. And then things I'm going to ask from you as the senior director or the CISO or, my leadership. So let's start with why. So first, this is not a talk to convince you to build an OffSec team. That's a whole other talk. Happy to have a conversation with anybody on the internet that wants to have it of like when and why, or to convince you to do it. This talk kind of assumes that you are going to do it, that you've already made this decision and you want to get the most out of it, or you have one and you're trying to get the most out of it. But 2 core reasons. One, the first time I came to BlackHat, I was a West Point cadet, and I was making the joke when I gave the talk, like, could hardly grow a beard. Now the thing's turning gray. I'm actually at a point in my career where I actually just want to see things get fixed with the time that I have left on the planet. So what little influence I have, what little time I have left, I want to see things get better in InfoSec. And I've endured the same mistakes as either as an IC or as a manager on these teams the last 15 years. So, and now that I'm a manager and I build teams, I've been giving this talk or this information like one-to-one, and giving this talk was a chance to give this information one to many. So selfish reason number 1. Number 2, I want to save us and you as the leader time and money. So maximizing value, minimizing costs by sharing common mistakes or misconceptions I've seen along the way, because most of these are avoidable. And the analogy that I would give is, I'm blessed in my career that I was able to afford a Range Rover. That was the car that I always wanted. What's interesting when you buy a Range Rover is they offer you a 2-day course on how to drive the Range Rover, because those vehicles can do amazing things. It's like buried deep in the manual, or you might be afraid to do it because you've got a 6-figure car. Are you really going to take it down a super steep incline or up a mountain or through the mud? You may not do that on your own, but if someone is willing to guide you, to show you, okay, well, actually, if you turn the car here, put it in this configuration, it can actually do things you would, the things on the commercial are actually real. It would allow you to use more of the features of the car. So I'm hoping at the end of this talk, I have expanded your mind and shown you what your offensive security team can do for you, and you're willing to take it out of like everyday mode and put it into the snow or climb a mountain mode or drive on the beach mode. Anyway, that's the idea. So let's see how we do. Purpose. So as I mentioned, I'm here to save you money. Now, of course, the caveat to this is like, I'm going to ask you to spend money to save your money. But we all know breaches are expensive. These fines are expensive. Wasting resources is expensive. writing these blog posts or having incidents is expensive if you think about all the people that have to be involved with a serious breach or serious incident. Not to mention like reputational costs, which can be hard to compute. Some companies don't ever recover from the reputational hit that they have for breaches or just the loss of data. The other thing too is like consultants, and I remember being a consultant and loving when I come in and I'm done in a day. Now that someone that runs internal teams, I want the people that we're paying that are external to us to work really hard for the money. And so if you have an internal team, they should be finding all the low hanging fruit. They should actually be, getting to the limits of their ability. And so the people that you're paying to come in and attack you, you're having to get the best of the best, and they're having to really work for it. But offset can help you find the tech debt, the shadow IT, all the scary things. And then like before you have the breach, before you have to write the blog post, before you have the incident with all the people in it. And so come with the data, right? So there's an IBM report linked at the bottom there where it says the average cost of a data breach in 2022 was 4.35 million. So how am I saving you money? If we can avoid the legal costs with that, we're saving money. If you're not using your cyber insurance, we're saving you money. Calling in consultants is super expensive and costs a lot of money. You can use offensive security to find the things an attacker would before you need to write the post. Find things that are not on the roadmap, right? Because we have a roadmap of all the scary things, but many groups in an organization are constantly creating new scary things that you're not even aware of, especially depending on the maturity of things in the process. Like sometimes you just find out about new services when they're announced and they didn't do a review, or they're on the internet and someone is submitting something through the bug bounty program or something. And that's when you find out that someone deployed a thing. If you've got internal teams, they can develop processes and tools to be finding those things more quickly, right? And the kind of like the joke I made was like, anybody that's had to call in the Mandiant helicopter for an incident, how painful that is on the monetary side. So if we can avoid that, we're already saving the org lots of money. So, and then so a little more on the purpose. I'll start with an analogy to kind of get us all on the same page, because as I was preparing this talk, I realized that not every CISO was a red teamer. So those of you that did OffSec in a past life, thank you for your service. But let's do an analogy to kind of level set. So I like to think of your blue team as digital paramedics. They turn up when bad things happen. The rest of the time, they're on standby, ready to review potentially bad things, or they're training. So most of the time, they're responding to the digital equivalent of a scraped knee or something basic. But if you have a blue team, you've invested a lot of time and a lot of money to protect yourself. You want these digital paramedics to be able to handle a heart attack, a life-threatening scenario, a gunshot wound when the situation arises. You don't want them like Googling the instruction manual on how to use like the AED shock device when someone's having a problem, right? That's why we train. Now, in general, I don't like military analogies, despite being from the military, but one useful thing here is that special operations, they do this a lot. They threat model, they train, they rehearse, they train every single thing they could think of that could happen to go wrong. That's why like the US Special Forces are so good. You want your blue team to be doing this. Now, they're probably busy. So who's the best person to do that? Well, offensive security is the best person to do that. We can be your disaster scenario planners, your trainers. We're also your control validators, and the blue team is the control builders. We keep the paramedics current. We figure out the most likely scenarios they're going to face. Then we figure out these should never happen scenarios and make them take place so that they can practice in a safe way. So if the disaster scenario ever actually happens, it's not the first time they've undergone this thing. So when the helicopter crashes outside the compound, we've already thought about this, tabletopped it, or done it in red team ops or in pen tests to understand what we need to do here. So again, how do we do all that? We do that because offensive security is your in-house contrarians. We validate and challenge assumptions that you make. Many times things are just assumed to work a certain way or not be possible. It's our job as offensive security people to say, okay, I'm going to disregard the company line on that's not possible and actually try it anyway. And we do that through threat modeling, penetration testing, red teaming, purple teaming. Like we've all been told, if you do X, we'll catch you. If you can't deploy in prod without a turn of approvals, can't create an AWS access key. All pastes are secret by default. There's no single factor services outside. All of these things you assume are true. They're not always true, right? And we don't want to use external vendors or bug bounty or other things. We want the red team or the offensive security team to find these things for us. And the example that I give is I worked a place and they said, you cannot SSH with a password anywhere in the organization because we have turned on SSH CA. And the person that said that, to them, from their perspective, it was true. They had gone through to a whole bunch of servers and turned that on and enabled it. And so all the testing they did, there was no way around that. Now, what was also true at the same time was that there were some servers where it broke some automation and they rolled that change back. And then there were a few other hosts that people didn't know about it. So while we had this assumption that you couldn't do the thing, the actual truth of the matter, because we went through and tested it, was like, well, there's actually a few edge cases that existed. So offensive security can help you find, one, validate that those things are true, and then two, find those edge cases. So again, we're here to validate what you believe to be true. So inevitably, you've got a green, red, yellow chart as a leader that someone's given you on a variety of things. You're getting that. Do you have multi-factor everywhere on the outside? Are there default passwords in the org? Intrusion, incident response says you can't move laterally or persist without getting caught. What are the most likely paths to critical systems or data? We can help you find that out. All right. We don't have the same scoping problem that like Joe Pentester has. And then we can train, and have the time to read through the code, interview the people to actually get to ground truth on a lot of these issues. And so, will I train the blue team along the way? I sure will. But will I also be able to help you demonstrate growth in your defensive capability? We'll do that through the operations that we're doing. I'll also give you a real world measurement or report card when we do red team operations. So when we try to do that, catch me if you can, break in from outside kind of thing, that's that real world measurement report card of things. And you do occasionally want to also do that as well. And so when do you need one? This is probably the number one question I get. So the first answer is when you will do something with the results. That's like maybe the top level semi-snarky answer is, when do I need one? When I have the ability to do something with what we'll find. Another answer would be like when the cost that you're spending for that offensive security team is less than the cost of a breach. I would think most teams will cost you less than $4.25 or $3.5 million. So most likely, one can help to bring down the likelihood of that. With one, you should do that. But yeah, the company should be ready to prioritize fixing the findings, of which there will probably be many. You should have a blue team to be ready to start to create detections or improve detections with the testing output or the activities that are taking place. Startups might also want to consider to just go purple from the beginning. And what that means is you hire your red and blue team roughly at the same time. And that red team is doing less of the like break in from outside kind of activities, but more of the putting the adversarial lens or the adversarial thinking viewpoint on the things that they're creating, the services we're building, architectures that we're designing. Let's go ahead and look at those now. Because what happens is usually OffSec shows up 2 years later. Lots of things are already in place, and it's actually quite a big lift to change some of these things. You may have deployed something to all of your offices around the world, and now you've got to go back and redo it because we found some things that could be improved. A lot of people think, yeah, I'll just hire the red team when I'm ready for that black box adversarial work. you could actually have these people work closely with detection response or incident response, work kind of as a offensive security consultant role, and actually go really far really quickly with that model. Anyway, so structure. I've lived in a ton of different places on the org chart. This is where we live at Robinhood. We have security operations. Underneath that, offensive security, insider threat, detection response, and threat intel. Basically, the three other teams that I need to be best buddies with, we all report to the same person, which has made it a lot easier to get more aligned and heading in the right direction. Most places I've worked, these four teams were in completely different or like internal orgs, or definitely in their own silos, and we didn't spend a lot of time. But this is really like its own like OODA loop of where, threat intel informs detection response, insider threat, and offensive security, like who's trying to attack us. Offensive security will then emulate that. That sends a loop to detection response to say, oh, what alerts do I have? What alerts need improvement? What alerts do we not have? Same thing for insider threat. Like maybe threat intel informs them a little bit, but insider threat is also needing detection response to create alerts, and then needing offensive security to emulate different types of insider threats. So you have all of these teams that are working together to raise the security floor of your organization, right? So the more we can work together, the more we can slowly raise these things and be pulling and pushing up and to the right, all in the same direction, because we're all aligned, all our OKRs, all of our goals, all aligned to all improving each other. So it's been a fabulous structure from my point of view. So what can an offensive security team do? So like I mentioned with the Range Rover analogy, lots of buttons, lots of like knobs to turn, lots of terrain that we can drive in. So here's like a large swath of things that your team can do. These may or may not apply specifically all to your org, but these are all the things that like basically hackers can do for you. Now, I have bug bounty as an asterisk there because it's a matter like keeping the like species together. Bug bounty, people that run bug bounty programs that are also like doing bug bounty on the weekends are great pen testers, great red teamers, and most importantly, they are probably the people that understand your network and your environment the best, because they have to go chase down all these bug bounty reports. So they end up knowing who everybody is. They end up knowing how these things work. They end up finding out where a lot of the bodies are buried via open tickets or just like things that they look at and poke at. They can be a great resource to your offensive security team. So for a while at Robinhood, I also ran the bug bounty program, and if they're in another org, or if they're in application security, you have this great resource that you're not including on pen test, and you're not including them for red team ops. So a lot of times on a red team op, you're like, oh, I'm stuck. I need to get from here to here. 9 times out of 10, your bug bounty person will know how to do that. They'll know what systems you need to traverse to do that. And if they don't know you're even doing an op, you can't get their help. You might not even know to ask them. So even if you just have them sitting in your Slack room is maybe, or your chat is also maybe a way to kind of get that input if they're not in the same org as you. But I really enjoyed when I had that person or those people working for me. Lots of other stuff. And then I have vuln management kind of scratched out there. These programs, and I'm going to tell on myself a little bit, these programs excel from detail-oriented, process-driven people. That rarely aligns with your offensive security types of people. Red team is great to assist with remediations, giving advice how things fixed, talking to the owning teams. We support vuln management. Anytime I've had to run it, it didn't go so well. And that just may be a Chris problem, but in general, it can be served better by a different type of person that is a little different than the offensive security hacker mindset. So here's what are some things that I would suggest you would think of as musts. Investment in headcount, right? So you need enough people to do ops and have a good team. Research and having modern tool sets. So breaking into things these days is difficult and time consuming. No, important one, no blame culture, joint red and blue presentations, but also like a safe and trusting relationship between the red team and blue team. Industry participation to stay current, relevant, and connected. So, attending conferences like BlackHat and DEF CON, or, local events. Cross-training team members. I really want to get that offensive security team to cross-train with AppSec, with detection and response, with Insider. My blue team time made me a much better red teamer because I began to understand how people triage things and what they're looking for. And access to all these tools that I never got to play with. So, trust and high integrity for the team. You might see me asking for more senior people. This is because we have access to all the money, all the emails, all the sensitive stuff. As a leader, I need to make sure that I can trust, the people in my team not to run away with all the ETH or all the Bitcoin or all the PII. Multiple times in my career, we've had access to all the money. I need to trust that the person is not going to run off with all that money. And so I have someone that's been in the industry a while longer, who's given talks and been around. It's a lot easier for me to trust and have that relationship than trust somebody brand new. You should ask me, force me, suggest that I am measurement of findings, progress, and improvements. And then the trust and freedom to execute independently. And I have that in asterisks. And what that means is I'm going to skirt just outside of policy because I need to understand what attackers are doing, but I'm going to do it safely. And I will work with you or anybody else that needs to be worked with to operate outside of policy, but to do it in a safe way, because attackers don't follow policies. All right. What does success look like for these teams? So, one, we need to decide together, right? So at some point, you as a leader or you as an organization said you needed an offensive security team. I would ask you, what did you expect from it? If we can't get aligned, we end up playing a bring me the rock game, which is super frustrating for me, super frustrating for you. So I know that you hired me as the subject matter expert, but I think there are assumptions that leaders have or worries that leaders have. It's a lot easier if you share those with me early so I can better inform my roadmap, and I can make sure that I'm getting, meeting the intent and meeting the things that are concerning to you or the board or other leaders in the org. I need to know those things. So again, you have an idea, the board probably has an idea, the CEO probably has an idea. I have lots of ideas, but I want to make sure that I'm meeting your ideas as well. But rather than leave it at that, let me give you some suggestions. So protecting the business, customers, brand, and reputation proactively. That's a good way to measure success. Reducing the cost to the bottom line. So like what were we able to get rid of? What did we validate worked? What did we validate didn't work? Were we able to get rid of some blinky boxes or SaaS products because they weren't actually doing anything? Building a world-class internal capability competitive to your industry peers, reducing vulnerabilities, consulting costs, auditing costs, finding, fixing all the low-hanging fruit, making those external auditors work for it. And you can generally see that by quality of the report or just how things turn out from one engagement to the other. All right, sorry, I had the hiccups. And then really importantly, identifying what works, where to spend money on security with data and not feelings. Because a lot of times we have like, oh, I think this works. Use your offensive security team to make sure things work. So, does the mail gateway work the way it should? Does EDR work the way it should? Does the SSO work the way it should? Are there bypasses? All these things that we just assume to work. Let's identify what actually works, what doesn't, and we do that with the results of those exercises and threat models and red teams and things like that. Metrics. So on the left is a lot of the metrics I saw on every red team post on metrics. These are all bad metrics on the left. So number of criticality of vulnerabilities found, I would expect that number to go down over time. It's also not a great metric for my team because I don't control that. And we don't want to get me into a position where I'm only judged on how many vulnerabilities I find. And that encourages me to cheat. It encourages other things where I don't have control over those, or could put in weird expectations or weird incentives. How many operations did we do? That's usually not a good number. Do we want 10 ops that resulted in really good findings and really good knowledge and really good validation? Or do we want to do one a week where that did not actually amount to too much? Time to fix a vuln. I don't generally have any control over that. Number of vuln found, kind of same. Mean time to detect, mean time to respond. This is one that you do want the blue team to do. You may be interested in it, but it can sometimes not be a great success metric, in that as my tradecraft improves, that number is actually going to change, right? So blue team might actually get that number, that mean time to detect number, way down. But then if that number is not allowed to change because my team got better, or we bought a new tool, or we found O-Day or other things, then it can kind of create some weird environments or weird incentives of like, anyway, that number is going to change because my tradecraft is going to change over time. So not a great metric. Do you want to know about it? You do, but we don't want to get too hung up on that number. It may be interesting per op, and you can kind of dig into those a little bit, but as a blanket number, it's not great. So what are some good things, or some good metrics? Things that changed because of the work that offensive security did. What did we harden? What configs did we change? What things did we finally deprovision? How did attack surface go down? Did we remove attack paths from the environment permanently? Or have we created attack paths that you can consistently detect every time? Like, if you have to go through this one system to get to the rest of the network, well, if we've now learned that and can monitor that, and there's now no way to get around that, right? It's going to be very hard to move laterally and get into that other thing. So, and then the other one is, net new detections, and then difficulty of conducting attacks over time. And so something that we're experimenting with now is kind of over time saying, okay, how hard was it to do the thing that we were trying to do? Now, the hypothesis is that over time, as detections get better, hardening gets better, what's green and yellow will turn into orange, red, and black, right? Couldn't do it up to where we couldn't do it. We had to use O-Day, or we got caught immediately along the way. That's where we expect this to go over time. So what do you have to do here to make that work? Well, but myself and maybe you, we need to make sure that we're occasionally redoing the same assessments as much as possible, so we can start to get those measurements. The rest of these will kind of like come out as we do different types of thing, right? So as an example, is it easier? Is it getting harder to fish in? Is it getting harder to write an O-Day against something in the perimeter? Is it getting harder to move laterally off a compromised laptop? Those are things that are part of a lot of operations. And as long as you can start to pull those out, you may even want to do some tagging there to say, okay, how are these things getting harder over time? So anyway, you got to think about eventually doing some similar engagements so you can actually start to measure. But most likely, you're going to do those similar engagements because those are the most likely attack paths that people are going to do. All right, so let's get into some asks. So things you should expect or ask from me. So if these documents don't exist, these should be some of the first things I create for you: a team charter, rules of engagement document. That one's super important because that's going to go through lots of legal, and lots of people do sign it and agree on it. And then a 1 to 2 year plan. When I do that 1 to 2 year plan, I'm going to be asking you about success and what things do you worry about? What things should this program be doing? So depending on the size of the team, we may have to pick some things and leave some things. Important, but can come a little bit later. How do I deconflict with the blue team for red team operations? So when I'm doing that catch me if you can thing, how am I deconflicting? How do I do it for other operations? How do I do that for the pen tests? How are we keeping up with vulns in the remediation? And I'll just share from those first two. Basically, what I've come to learn is one, having a shared channel, super important, so people can just ask the questions. Two, we made the agreement early on that if you see the activity coming from my laptop, it is not a red team operation. We are not playing the catch me if you can from my laptop or anybody on my team's laptop. So that has gone a long way to say, okay, if you see some weird stuff and it's not from someone in OffSec's laptop, now maybe if you have some reason to think it's us, you can ask in that purple team channel and we can confirm or deny. There's also times where for the red team ops, I'll just bring in people that know I have a good relationship with the blue team lead. That relationship with the blue team lead actually allows me to just keep them informed of what's happening, and then they can guide their team, because these are all training exercises, right? Disaster scenarios. So we can dial in the right amount of knowing where we are. They might know that we're on a laptop, or they might know exactly whose laptop we're on. It just depends on the environment, but that goes a long way. You should ask me to update you on the maturity of the team. That should happen at least yearly. Red Team Maturity Model is a great resource for that. It will helps me make new policies, guide the team, make new processes, but also helps you understand what level of maturity is your offensive security program. Ask me to document all the things, the wiki, the runbooks, internal GitHubs, etc. Understanding how we intend to find new things, how often that I'm doing that is probably important to know. Running lists of risk avoided, risk mitigated, and other losses avoided. This is useful for you as a leader. It's also useful for me at perf time. And then I'd say, like, most importantly, how do I intend to educate and humanize what we find? Offensive security, a lot of times, is public relations, internal public relations, and marketing. We are here to help and support the organization. We don't name and shame, but ultimately, we are here to make things harder for the outside bad guys. In my career, I used to just point and laugh and say, you suck, or just throw vulns over the fence and hope they get fixed. How I've changed doing that in the last couple of jobs is my team, if they feel, one, they have the desire, and two, they understand the impact of what they're doing, can submit code changes and submit diffs for things that we find. A lot of times things are like a one-line fix or a config change. And if the team feels like they can do that and understand the implications of what they're doing, they're allowed to do that. And that's gone a really long way. The other thing we do is just share what we find in a positive and informing way. Again, it was not to make fun of anyone. We're trying to find these things before someone else does, before we get breached, before we have to spend a bunch of money, before we have losses. Everything we find before that is a win, and we need to celebrate it as such. All right, things I'm going to ask for you. Let's get all the previous red team baggage out of the way early. I know you've had bad experiences either with internal teams or consultants. Tell me about that so that I can not do that. So I can know when we're heading that way, or I can just avoid those kind of operations or whatever it is. Yeah, I know there's bad consultants. I've probably done it to you as well. But let's figure out what that is, or what really grinds the leadership's gears. So let me know that so that I can avoid it at all costs. Assume breach is a great way to shortcut the most time-consuming and least ROI OffSec problem, which is getting in from outside. Again, that fish from outside, or that fishing in, or whatever, that's something the blue team works on a lot. That's constantly happening from a variety of people, whether that be drive-bys or nation states. It's not if an attacker will get in, it's when. So having me start from an initial access is far more interesting. You get some more scrutiny. It's a more interesting problem, and it's a thing that usually detection and response doesn't have as much time and practice in. So, like, We're responding to the heart attack instead of the skin knee. When we assume breach, we start from a laptop, or we start from some sort of perspective that's a little further than from outside. We can use if you have a phishing simulation or phishing awareness program, you're getting the metrics already of how susceptible the organization is to phishing. You don't need to pay your offensive security team to do that all the time. Will I still do that for you occasionally? Yes, I will. We don't want to do it every time. You can get right with Assume Breach, you can get you right to testing the controls, defensive depth, making more progress in less time. That's super important. It gets me to try hypotheses, try things much faster, analyze and figure out more likely attack paths. The more interesting stuff if we use the Assume Breach model. So big believer in it. Other things I'm going to ask for you: money for training, money for physical security gear, money for red team tools and infrastructure, under door hooks, physical lockpicking tools, badge cloning tools, software, money for AWS. So we have separate accounts so we can run our own infrastructure, right? Org-wide threat model, and then headcount. I've been offered positions and seen teams where it's like an OffSec team of one. That's it's very hard to build a program and do ops with one person. And for red team ops, you really need a minimum of 2 people. You need someone to double check commands, especially if you're in like dicey or sensitive environments. Before you hit enter, you want someone to double check the command that you're about to run on the database or in prod. So you need that count. You can basically think of 2 person per op. So if you want to do multiple ops a month, you're going to need more than 2 people. I need you to internally publicly support me. I'm going to be asking for weird stuff, edge cases, special cases, stuff that if anybody else in the company asked, you would probably say no, but stuff that I need to answer the questions and validate the assumptions that you have. So stuff's like extra laptops, laptops that have software that's like considered malicious maybe by some of the things that you run that look for those sorts of things. Separate infrastructure, because if you're doing a good job monitoring all your infrastructure, if my C2 accounts are there, then when they go to search for things, they just come up in Splunk or come up in the SIM. Test accounts, like multiple accounts. I might even ask you crazy stuff like using software deployment tools to deploy my red team tools. Again, we're assuming breach. We want to answer questions like, oh, what happens if someone in finance gets popped? Well, the easiest way to do that is just to execute, our implant on that laptop, rather than having to fish in or get someone. We can answer these questions. There are other ways to answer these questions more quickly than fishing in or having somebody click on something ourselves. So I'm going to ask for weird things. Internally, publicly support me so that people don't immediately say no, even though they should know to say no to probably everybody else except for my team. Tell me directly. Don't go around the team. We're all here. We're all accessible. We do adversarial work, but we don't want adversarial relationships. So if I want anything from this talk, it's to remember it's adversarial work, not adversarial relationships. We're all on the same team and trying to help. And then I mentioned policy before, but like attackers don't follow policies. We find unknown badness by safely navigating the ignoring of those policies, right? So like, ever seen APT 38 stop and read policy before they steal things? Nope, they don't. They just do it. So we need to safely do that by letting people know where it's coming from, but still ignoring those things. So trust your leads to figure those sorts of things out. That's more of a people problem. And then probably lastly, I'm going to need time and flexibility. Creativity, exploration, that's key for hackers. That's key for offensive security teams. We're going to go dark sometimes as we're doing research and development. Breaking into modern operating systems takes time. Building implants takes time. All that stuff takes a lot of time. This isn't a consultancy where we need 100% utilization. There's going to be exploratory or unplanned or research time in your objective and key results or your goals and initiatives. You might see them on the schedule like, oh, what were you guys doing the last 2 weeks, the last month? Well, we were actually building tools, or we were doing exploratory pen. We're finding that unknown badness. Sometimes nothing comes from that. Like if we're just exploring around trying to find net new things, sometimes we don't find anything. So, but when we don't find things, that's good. That means we actually know what's happening. think of offensive security more as a research organization versus an engineering organization. The metrics are just different. We're not judging us by lines of code and other things that you may do for an engineering org is just not going to work the same for an offensive security organization. All right. Final takeaways. We are your in-house contrarians and validators. We are your blue team trainers. We are the finders of scary things, and we are the validators of what you believe to be true, and that we do adversarial work and not adversarial relationships. So I'm here. The best way to get a hold of me, if you're watching this video, is to hit me up on LinkedIn. I've kind of abandoned Twitter at this point. And yeah, if there's any suggestions or comments, please send them my way. I appreciate the time. See ya.